Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of Talking Germany, the show where we do just that. And today my guest is one of Germany's leading film and TV actors. And here he is in person, Christian Berkel. Thank you very much for joining us here today on Talking Germany, Christian.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Great to have you here. Now, Christian Berkel began his film career working for the great Swedish director Ingmar Bergman, no less. In his early days, he often played bad guys. Later, he was cast as the former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt twice, before going on to feature in a number of prominent American productions like Valkyrie, alongside Tom Cruise, and in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds. He also has a truly remarkable story to tell about his own immediate family, so I can guarantee you there is plenty to look forward to. Christian, once again, welcome for coming along today. I'm guessing you didn't come very far today.
No, well, I came today, no, but yesterday I was in Switzerland, in Ascona, looking for the roots of my family because my mother was born there. And there's a mountain where my grandfather and my grandmother spent some years called the Mountain of Truth.
The Mountain of Truth?
The Mountain of Truth, yeah. And that was in the beginning of the last century. Very interesting movement where people from all over the world met and looking for new ideas of life and what they called Lebensreform, to reform life, you know, that was kind of an answer of the Industrial Revolution, and they wanted to go back to nature, like big French philosopher Rousseau and all this, you know, going back to the roots. So that's what I did the last days, and so today I didn't come so far, but yesterday.
Wow. I don't know where to pick up on that. We've already got to Rousseau at the beginning of the show. Well, I'd like to go back, though, to the reason I asked you about where you came from today is because you're that unusual thing. You're a Berliner in Berlin. Berlin's a little bit like...
That's true.
It's a little bit like New York. It's the kind of city that lots of people move to.
Yeah.
Are you a typical Berliner?
Well, that's difficult to say. I mean, maybe it's like New York. I mean, if you say I'm a Berliner, you are a Berliner. If you live here, you can be a Berliner if you want to. In terms of language, I mean, of dialect, I'm not a Berliner. I'm speaking what we call, and what nobody knows in any other part of the world, what we call the High German.
High German.
High German. I remember once doing a movie in the UK, and some actors came and said, "Listen, we heard that you have something you call High German," and I mean, like, when you play Shakespeare, does everybody speak that? I mean, no difference between the kings and the other parts? And I said, yes. And they said, well, that's strange. And when I thought about it, I thought, yeah, they're right, that's really strange. It's something, I don't know why. Brecht, for example, always said to the actors when they came when they got problems during the rehearsals to find the right way to perform, he said, just say it with your own home dialect, just to get something very personal into the part. And so I wasn't brought up with that, because my father came from a real Berlin family speaking very strong dialect, and my mother didn't like that, and she always said to him, just speak proper German at home, please, because of the kids. And so I didn't really learn it.
Fascinating stuff, Christian. You mentioned the theatre there, yeah? And we talked about you growing up in Berlin. I think I read about a very important experience you had aged about 6.
Yes.
You went to the theatre.
Yes. It was a child performance, and I watched The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Oh, wow. A great story.
That was really the moment where I decided to become an actor. I went out of the play, I was standing on the street, and I said to myself, that's what I want to do. And I told everybody who wanted to hear it or who didn't want to hear it that this was going to be my job, and everybody said, yeah, nice kid. And what else would you like to do? Fireman or policeman? I said, no, actor. And I'm going to be an actor. So when I was about 14 and I started taking acting lessons in France, my mother realized that that was really what I was going to do. And the only thing she said was, if you really do that, I'm gonna, how do you say, verfluchen, banish?
I'm going to put a curse on you.
Put a curse, not on me, but on the day where I bought the first theatre ticket for you. But that, she didn't really mean it seriously. And my father only said, listen, if you want to become an actor, you must be aware of one thing. If you're just an average doctor, for example, in a small city somewhere in Germany, you can have a very meaningful life and be happy with that. And also, financially speaking, be quite well off. If you're a little actor in a little city somewhere in Germany, you're going to suffer. And by all means. And I said, well, maybe, but I still want to do it.
Good for you. So many different faces, so we're certainly going to talk about some of them. I'd like to just talk about one tiny moment in that in the portrait of you that we just saw. You down in the woods, yeah?
Yeah.
That must have been somewhere down near where you live, I'm guessing.
Absolutely, yeah. That's very close to where I live. That's about 5 minutes walking.
It's where I go jogging.
Yes.
3 or 4 times a week. I'm going to be looking out for you next time I'm down there. Let's go back to the beginning of your film career. You had this amazing opportunity to play in a movie, a Bergman movie. A Serpent's Egg, it was called. I haven't seen it, yeah? It wasn't just a great opportunity for you. It was a very, very close encounter with Ingmar Bergman himself.
Yes, it's, I mean, for me, it's the only genius I really met.
Aha.
In person. I think he really was a genius. And I had seen most of his films, so I was very nervous on the first day. And when I came on the set, he came directly to me and said, "Hi, I'm Ingmar," in German. So, I mean, in the States, that's absolutely normal. Yeah. But in Germany, no. Everybody would say, "Mr. Bergman," and you would, you know, we have this difference. We don't say just you, we have thou and thee. And,
exactly, yeah.
So it was like if God would come to you and say, "Hi, I'm Sam."
We're on first name terms.
It was very strange. And then he started talking with me, and I thought he was going to be explaining the movie, the scene or whatever. And he didn't talk about the scene, he didn't talk about the part, he just had a private talk. Because he realized I was very nervous, and he just wanted to make me feel good and comfortable and bring me down a little bit. And we talked for about an hour on set.
That is a long time.
That is a very long time. He asked me, why did you want to become an actor, and so and so, what did you do before, and so and so. And then he said, you know, do you want a coffee, do you want a cigarette, like that. And he said, if you want, we just walk through the scene together. And he explained the scene. He said, you know, you play this character, he's a young student, he's very normal, he doesn't have any problems, and he gets this drug. It's an experiment. It was a doctor in the 20s, a little bit like the doctors like Mengele and all these people did in the 30s. And
the Nazi doctor, yeah.
So that was before even Nazi time, and he did experiments with human beings, very, very terrible experiments, and filmed them while he was doing these experiments. And so they're going to give you a drug, and this drug is going to produce paranoia. And you will be wanting to kill yourself. And he was explaining that in a very, very technical way. But it was just the way he looked at you. It was like underneath, you know, he was putting his message like through a door, like a piece of paper coming through the door. You could read it or not. It was very, very, very special.
Amazing stuff. Ingmar Bergman.
Yeah.
Wow. Before that, we've just got to build a bridge from the very young you, the 6-year-old who went to the theatre in Berlin, and that first film appearance.
Yeah.
You had a phase in your as a youngster, as a teenager, in France. What was that all about?
Well, that was when I was very young. I was maybe 7 or 8. I discovered, or I heard about my Jewish family and myself being Jewish. And at that time, I felt so offended by what happened had happened in Germany. I had a real identity problem. I had a problem to identify myself with this country. And so I learned French when I was very small. I was 4 years. My mother started talking French with me because,
really?
Yeah,
she just chatted to you in French.
Yeah. Because we spent a lot of time in France and in Switzerland, in the French part. And I said to her, "Well, they're all so stupid here. Nobody speaks German." And then she said, "Well, maybe you are stupid because, I mean, we're in France, so that's their language. And the stupid one is you because you don't understand them." I was completely shocked. And then she said, "But would you like to learn it?" And I said, "Yes." And then she started speaking French with me, which was a huge present for me because I learned it like my own language. And she was an interpreter for French and Spanish, and she had spent many years in France also, and that's why she spoke French so well. And then I went to French school and so on. And friends then asked me, "Would you like to come just for like 3 or 4 months to spend in a French school?" And I said yes, because I wanted to get out of Germany. And so I went with this family. They were close friends of our family, and they had 2 boys about my age. And I loved it so much there that I wrote a long letter to my parents saying, "Please," and with all the reasons I could build up, "Would you please leave me here for a little more time?" And then from 3 months, it went on for 2 years.
Does that letter still exist today?
I'm afraid
the family
no.
archive. What a pity!
Not.
What a pity! Yeah, that would be an incredible document.
Yes,
yeah? Of the young Christian. Yeah, you've mentioned the trauma of German history.
Yeah.
In passing. Yeah, that's what you're talking about when you say that you had problems identifying with Germany. Yeah, you've played in recent years. You've been involved in an awful lot of sort of historical dramas about German history. How did that?
Not an awful lot. It was
several.
5.
Is there a pattern there? Is there a reason for that, or did it just happen?
I think it just happened. Maybe it was, when you play a part and people like that, they tend to offer you the same part again and again. So that is maybe one of the reasons. Like when the crew of Valkyrie came here to Berlin and casted Valkyrie, the director, Bryan Singer, the writer, Chris McQuarrie, and Tom Cruise, all had seen 2 movies. One was Downfall, and the other one was Black Book by Paul Verhoeven, Downfall by Oliver Hirschbiegel. And so they had seen me in these 2 parts, and they already had me in mind for the part of Merz. And I got this phone call from my agent saying, "Yeah, you should go there tomorrow morning, meet Bryan Singer and Chris McQuarrie." And I said, "Well, what does that mean? I mean, do I have to prepare anything? Is there a reading or whatever?" She said, "No, I think if you want to play the part, you've got it already."
Wow, that's an unusual.
That's very unusual. And I thought, that can't be. Must be some misunderstanding. So I went there, and I started talking, or we started talking, and I think that on that first day it was just Chris McQuarrie and Mr. Adler, the other producer, and I realized after about 10 minutes they were waiting for something, and then suddenly Chris said, "Well, would you like to play Merz?" I said, "Of course I would like to." "Oh, well, great. Then let's meet next week with Bryan." And that was it.
Wow.
And then I met Bryan, and it was also quite short, like 10, 15 minutes. And next day I saw him in the restaurant, and he came to me and said, well, you're on the wall, you know, where all the pictures of the actors who were playing in this film. So, yeah, it was very exciting.
That's how you got the job?
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Tell me about Inglourious Basterds, yeah? Quentin Tarantino, yeah? I'd like to ask you about the call there, but what I'd really like to ask you, I mean, Quentin Tarantino, in this day and age, at this specific time, there's nobody more sexy to be involved with than Quentin Tarantino.
Yes.
You were, yeah?
Yes.
What's he like? He's a genius, obviously, in his own very special way.
Incredible person, and I think what is the very special thing about him is, you know, you have among the really talented people, directors, you have some who are very analytical, and you have some who are very creative, emotionally, I mean, who have a very strong fantasy, an almost chaotic mind for creation. I've never met someone who has both that strongly. You know, he can produce a situation where everybody brings in something, it's mainly him, of course, and creates like a situation that from outside would look chaotic. And then he is able to organize it in a very, very, very fast and to make his point. Yeah. And this mixture is amazing, simply amazing. And you know, when I read the script, I thought, Jesus, it's incredible. This is the first time I read a script where someone brings to make people understand what Nazi thinking is about. Karl May.
The German
writer,
adventure writer,
fiction writer of Western stories.
Exactly. Tales of adventure.
Tales of adventure.
The American West.
Yeah. And he was, many people don't know that, even in Germany, one of the favorite writers of Hitler. Hitler read all Karl May.
Fact. Yeah.
That's a fact. And to understand German thinking, to read Karl May is very clever. So he brought in Karl May in his script, and I read this, and I thought, man, this is really incredible. And the first scene with Christoph Waltz is, I think, one of the most brilliant scenes about how antisemitism or racism or the whole Nazi thing really works. That is truly outstanding.
Okay. Christian Berkel, I am at a disadvantage because I haven't yet been to the exhibition. You have.
Yes.
Yeah? What can you tell us?
It's a great exhibition. It's more for adults. I thought about going there with my kids, but it's very, which is typical for Jews, it's very word-driven.
I see. Yeah.
And so you have to have a certain age to really understand the jokes and everything. Yeah. There's also a part where you have different American comedy series talking about the subject. Very, very funny. And when I watched that, I was so sad. I said, well, why can't we do that in Germany? Why don't we have a writer who's doing this kind of humor?
And what was the answer to the question?
I'm afraid the answer is that...
deep sigh, deep sigh.
Yeah. Everybody would be afraid to laugh about the cliches. Yeah. Being afraid to be accused of antisemitism. Yeah. And I think in other countries, especially in America, this is not such a big problem.
I think people in Germany have, in general, more comfortable viewing habits.
Yes, this is true, but especially with this subject, it's very difficult. It's very difficult in Germany. I think that's not so good, because if you're always afraid to be accused, maybe, for being for antisemitism or anything like that.
It's difficult to laugh.
It's difficult, and people, I think that's also a point where people might get. That's something where antisemitism can grow very easily. If you're not allowed to talk, if you're not allowed to express even bad thoughts, it's never good. You always have to be very careful with that.
There are plenty of indications, I'm afraid to say, that anti-Semitism is possibly, probably on the rise in Germany. We saw some manifestations of that in the report. Yeah, I know that you are very concerned about that.
Yes, I'm afraid it's not only on the rise in Germany, but of course everybody is, and especially me and many friends are very concerned by some things that happened lately. But on the other side, we realize that also racism in general is on the rise in Germany.
Across Europe.
Across Europe, also in Germany, we had many terrible things happening lately. And there is an idea expressed by other people who thought a lot more about it than me, saying maybe that the Holocaust was gave a big pause to anti-Semitism worldwide, because everybody after that said, we don't want to experience anything similar again, because that was close to the end of civilization. And now, slowly, you know, most of the people died already, and it comes up very slowly again. Holocaust becomes history, and people tend to forget very quickly bad things. And so we shouldn't be hysterical. It's always dangerous to get hysterical about that, but we should watch very closely and very carefully. And the best thing, I think, is very important in Germany, and for that this exhibition is very good, is to tell people what Jewish life is, because for many people in Germany, there's only one connection: Jewish, Holocaust. And that's not good, because that's the connection where everybody feels ashamed. And when you feel ashamed, it's very difficult to get close to someone. So for the Jewish people, it would be very important to tell about Jewish life, because Jewish life is something very different from the Holocaust. It's so lively. It's so, you know, if people have seen once a bar mitzvah, for example, that has so much to do with life. When you see this one kid standing there in the middle and addressing at the end to his family, to everybody who's in the synagogue, with his speech, which is really something where he shows that he wants to become a man or a woman at the bat mitzvah, and he wants to be part of this world of adults. That's very moving, and it's not like in Christianity, 20 kids at the same time, you know. It's just this one kid, it's his day or her day.
I can see your eyes lighting up.
Yeah.
I must ask you, because we touched on this already, we began the show with it, you were talking about your mother and father. Share with us the remarkable story of your mother and your father.
Well, my grandfather met my father first when my father was 17 years old, and he was coming from a very lower class family. He was a young communist, dressed all in red, sitting in the park and reading a very difficult book by a historical writer called Mommsen, and it was the Roman history. And so my grandfather, who was a journalist and a writer, approached him and said, well, young man, do you understand what you're reading? And he said, well, I think so. And by the way, you could write me an excuse because I'm, how do you say, Schule schwänzen?
I'm skiving school. I'm taking a day off school. Yeah.
I'm skiving school. And he said, well, I will do so if you come to visit us. And so one day he came, And my mother opened the door and she saw this young man standing there. She was 13, he was 17, and they fall in love immediately.
Wow.
Both. And my grandfather came and said to my father, okay, come to the library room. And they were sitting there having a tea, talking, and my father said, I want to marry your daughter. I said, well, young man, it's a little early, and you still have some time, but okay. And then he always came, and it became really a love story. And of course, they couldn't get married because she was Jewish and he wasn't. And he was German, and under Hitler that was just impossible. Yeah. And then they were separated by war. She left 1938 for Paris, was then imprisoned in France, in Gers, in the Pyrenees, in a camp. Got out of that camp, was sent back to Germany. That's a whole difficult story, how she could survive there. And my father was a military doctor and was imprisoned in Russia and stayed from almost end of the war, 45, until 50. He was imprisoned over there. And she went to Argentina with their son. She became pregnant in 44. And they lost contact completely. And then when she came back in 55 with her son, she went to see a friend of hers and who asked, do you still know where Herman is? She said, no, completely lost contact. And she said, well, look up in the phone book. Maybe his name is there. And she looked up in the phone book. And he was there, and she phoned him, and he didn't recognize her voice because he didn't hear it for almost 10 years. And started asking her questions. And then suddenly he said, well, I mean, I can't help it, but give me just one little clue. I mean, do we have anything in common? And she said, yes, a son. And then he said, where are you? And they met in a cafe, and he, meanwhile, got married. And he divorced right away and married her. And then 2 years later, I was born. So that's, in short, the love story.
What a story. What a story. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Unbelievable. You've brought something with you, Christian. Yeah?
Yes.
A cherished possession. Yeah? Which has got something to do with all these things we've been talking about. Yeah?
This is a very special thing. Not very long ago, I was opening the Jewish Film Festival in Potsdam. And a friend of mine, whom I didn't see for 20 years, came and said, I have something I always wanted to give you. Your mother gave this to me. This is the kippah of your great-grandfather. As a kid, it's a small, very small kippah, you can see. And I was so moved and almost shocked that I said, and I had to go on stage and open this festival. And I thought, Jesus, how can I make this? I'm really afraid I will cry. But I didn't. I made it.
Another amazing story. If we're talking about, you're telling me the story of your family, which is a tortured story. We're talking about anti-Semitism and racist sentiment across Europe, in Germany specifically. Yeah? What's the way to tackle this problem? How do we deal with it? In a political sense, because the German politicians, they're always wringing their hands and they're always saying we've got to do something. And you've said, okay, people should share their experiences a little bit more, but there needs to be more to it than that. Well,
the thing I'm very concerned about is the whole problem with Israel and Palestine. And I realize right now that in Germany there's a tendency to express very indirectly anti-Semitism by criticizing Israel. And of course there are things you can criticize about Israel. And it's not about not being allowed to criticize, you're always allowed. Especially Israelis do criticize quite a lot what happens there. Yeah. But the way it happens here sometimes makes me very, very sad. And I realize we have to talk a lot more. We have to talk about it, and that's why I talk about it very openly, about my family. That's why I wrote also an article in Die Welt answering a journalist, a very famous journalist in Germany, Jakob Augstein, who, in my opinion, does exactly what I was just talking about. He criticizes Israel, and maybe he even doesn't realize in which way his articles are anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I think I've got somewhere. 1 second, just give me half a second. And I've got a quote somewhere, because, I mean, you're talking about, he's a very, very prominent journalist here in Germany. And I actually, before we came into the show, I wrote down 2 quotes from what he said, Jakob Augstein. He said that the Gaza Strip, is a place where Israel incubates its own opponents. That was one of the statements he made that got him put on this list of using anti-Semitic rhetoric. And he also said that the Netanyahu government keeps the world on a leash with an ever-swelling war chant. Now, he was the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles immediately said those statements are incorrect and baseless. Yes. That was very much the way you saw it. He'd crossed the limit.
Yes, definitely. Because by that he's kind of saying that Israel becomes a threat, a world threat, and might produce World War III. And I mean, that's simply incorrect. That's the least you can say. We never should forget that this country is the only democratic country in the middle of dictatorships. It's very difficult for such a small country to deal with that.
And one thing that's often said it's always been a kind of a way of seeing this problem, is that anti-Semitism is something for the sort of the lower orders, for people who are not so educated. I think there's a sense in which that's a complete fallacy, that anti-Semitism is just as much something that is expressed by people who are highly educated. Is that something you see in your circles?
Well, in my circles, no. I would say in theater, film, TV circles, I've never realized something similar. But maybe that was never that strong. Artistic circles were always a little bit more aware of these problems. But it doesn't have anything to do with culture, I'm afraid. You had highly intelligent people, highly cultivated people, like Heidegger, for example. There is one of the greatest French writers who wrote one of the most incredible novels called Journey into the End of the Night, called Céline, who was his whole life, a terrible anti-Semite. Terrible. So you can be very intelligent and still, intelligence isn't... We shouldn't overestimate it.
Wise words, yeah. Let's lighten things up just before the end of the show, You've got a remarkable-looking face. You've got a remarkable-looking presence in general, You've got this shaven head, Where does that... it's very much your image, wouldn't you say?
Part of it.
Where did that decision come from?
What do you say? How do you say that in English? Aus der Not eine Tugend machen.
Oh, to make turn necessity into a virtue.
All right. So that's it. It was some kind of a necessity.
I see. It's interesting. You're very much viewed as an icon here in Germany. I put an icon for one aspect of life. I put your name and the word masculine into a search engine, and it said Christian Berkel is widely seen as Germany's most manly TV star.
Wow.
You and your wife, You're both big stars here in Germany, So how does that work? How does celebrity work in Germany?
It's all right. I mean, I'm always very amused when actors say, "Oh, I can't really stand that. I'm so, So, well, why did you become an actor then? To hide for the rest of your life? Or, I mean, there must be some attraction for you to that, being well known or whatever. It's absurd. So, I mean, you learn to deal with it. Of course, there can be some aspects of it that might be difficult to take, but I've never suffered.
We've got time. I think we normally finish the show with a quiz at the end of the show. I've got one question for you after all what we've said. Is Germany a country with a difficult past or a country with a promising future?
Both.
Okay, that's it. Wonderful. He's been a great guest. The very masculine, eloquent, thoughtful Christian Berkel. If you've enjoyed his company as much as I have, come back next week. Tschüss.